On the distant planet of Vexor, there was a royal family unlike any other. The Vexorians were known for their strength, agility, and beauty. Their society valued these qualities above all else, and their kings and queens were revered for their power and grace. But Princess Lyra, the youngest daughter of King Zorith and Queen Alira, was not like the others. Lyra had been born with a disability that set her apart in a way no one had ever expected. She was blind and unable to walk without assistance. Her condition was not the result of a battle or an accident. It was something she had been born with. In a world where physical strength meant everything, these traits were seen as weaknesses, and Lyra's family had tried their best to shield her from the cruelty of their society. But despite their efforts, the whispers in the palace halls were unavoidable. The court, the noble families, and even the common people could not hide their feelings. "Such a shame," the nobles would murmur. "A princess who can't even see or walk. She'll never rule. She's a burden." Even her closest relatives, despite their love for her, could not hide their disappointment. Her father, King Zorith, would often be seen in private, pacing in his chambers, his face twisted with worry. Her mother, Queen Alira, tried to remain strong, but Lyra could feel the sadness in her heart. Everyone around her seemed to agree on one thing: Lyra's disability made her unworthy of the throne. Lyra spent most of her days alone in the palace. The grand halls, filled with glittering decorations and the sound of laughter, felt like a distant world to her. She could hear the voices of the court and the hustle and bustle of the palace servants, but it all seemed so far away. Her only comfort was her small robotic assistant, Nox, who helped guide her around the palace. Nox was a simple machine, but to Lyra, he was more than just a tool. He was her companion, her only friend. Though she couldn't see the world, Lyra had a brilliant mind. She loved to listen to stories told by the palace historians, to learn about the history of her people and the stars. She would often lie in her chambers, listening to the soft hum of Nox's voice as he recited tales of ancient heroes and lost civilizations. Lyra would close her eyes, though she didn't need to, and imagine a world where she was strong, where she could lead her people with wisdom and courage, regardless of her disability. But no one believed in her. No one saw her potential. They only saw the princess who could not see or walk. One day, as she sat by the window, feeling the warm breeze on her face, Lyra overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two of the court's highest-ranking officials were discussing the upcoming royal event, a celebration meant to honor the peace between the Vexorians and their neighboring planets. They spoke with excitement about the dignitaries and the entertainers who would attend, about the lavish feast that would be prepared. But when the conversation turned to Lyra, it took a turn that made her heart ache. "The princess should not attend," one of the officials said. "Her condition would be a disgrace to the royal family. How can she represent us when she cannot even stand or see?" The other official nodded in agreement. "It would be better if she stayed hidden away. It's for the good of the kingdom." Lyra sat in silence, her heart sinking. She had always known the truth deep down, but hearing it spoken aloud was a different feeling. She was nothing but a burden to them. She had no place in the royal family, no place in the world beyond her small, quiet chambers. It was a harsh reality, but it was the truth. As the days passed, Lyra became more withdrawn. She spent her time in her chambers, lost in her thoughts. She knew she would never be the princess they wanted her to be. She would never be the strong, capable leader that Vexor needed. But was that all she could be? Could she really do nothing but accept her fate? Despite the pain, there was still a flicker of hope within Lyra. She dreamed of a world where people saw her for who she was inside, not for what she lacked on the outside. A world where kindness, strength of character, and wisdom were valued over physical abilities. But such a world felt so far away, almost impossible to reach. Little did Lyra know, her life was about to change in a way she could never have imagined. A human, someone from a faraway planet, would soon step into her life, a person who would see her not as a princess in the shadows, but as someone with the power to change the world. The royal palace of Vexor buzzed with excitement as the day of the human delegation's arrival approached. News had spread quickly through the kingdom that humans, the mysterious visitors from beyond the stars, were coming to negotiate a peace treaty with the Vexorians. It was a historic moment, one that many hoped would bring prosperity and strengthen their relationships with neighboring planets. In the grand halls, preparations were in full swing. Courtiers and servants hurried to set up extravagant decorations, and the palace was filled with the scent of exotic flowers. But amidst the bustle of the royal preparations, Princess Lyra remained in her chambers, far removed from the excitement. Her world was quiet, a world of silence and solitude. She had heard of the humans, how they were powerful, intelligent, and unlike any species the Vexorians had ever met. But she had never been interested in their politics or their arrival. To her, they were just another group of dignitaries, coming to make deals that had little to do with her. Still, she couldn't help but be curious about them, even if she didn't expect anything to change. After all, what could they possibly see in her? She was blind, disabled, and trapped in the shadows of her own kingdom. It was hard to imagine that any of the human leaders would take the time to notice someone like her. As the day of the human arrival came, Lyra stayed in her rooms, listening to the sounds of the celebrations growing louder outside. She had chosen not to attend the event, knowing she would only be a source of pity for the guests. Instead, she sat by the window, her fingers tracing the cool surface of the glass, lost in her thoughts. It was at that moment that Nox, her small robotic assistant, spoke up. "Princess, there is someone here to see you." Lyra tilted her head slightly. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Who is it, Nox?" I believe it is a human," Nox replied, his voice filled with hesitation. "Captain Alex Carter, the leader of the human delegation." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had heard the name before. Captain Alex Carter was said to be one of the most respected figures among the humans, known for his wisdom and kindness. Why would he want to visit her? With a gentle sigh, she nodded. "Let him in, Nox." The door opened quietly, and in stepped a man taller than any Vexorian she had ever met. His face was strong but kind, and his uniform was marked with symbols of leadership. His eyes, human eyes, were filled with curiosity, but not in the way she had expected. He wasn't looking at her with pity or judgment, as many had done. Instead, there was a glimmer of respect in his gaze, and his presence brought with it a strange sense of comfort. "Princess Lyra," Captain Carter said, bowing respectfully. His voice was warm and reassuring. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Lyra hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had not been accustomed to receiving visitors, especially not someone as important as him. "Not at all, Captain. You are most welcome," she replied, her voice soft but steady. "How can I help you?" Captain Carter took a careful step closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. He didn't seem rushed or impatient, which was unusual. Most visitors to the palace only came to see her out of obligation or curiosity. He, however, seemed genuinely interested. "I wanted to meet you," he said simply. "I've heard a great deal about you." Lyra's heart skipped again. What have you heard?" she asked, though she had a feeling she knew the answer. She could almost hear the whispers of the court in her mind, the ones that had followed her all her life. "I've heard that you are one of the wisest beings on Vexor," Captain Carter replied, his voice firm and sincere. "And I wanted to meet you, Princess, because I believe that wisdom and strength are not always defined by physical abilities." Lyra blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected such words. "Strength," she repeated, almost in disbelief. "Yes, strength. True strength," he said, offering her a small smile. "It's not just about how strong you are in body. It's about what you carry within you. The strength of your mind, your heart, and your spirit. I wanted to see that for myself." Lyra was quiet for a moment. His words were so different from what she was used to hearing. It was as if he saw something in her that no one else had ever noticed. She had always been told that her worth was tied to what she could do physically, but here was a human who didn't seem to care about her blindness or her disability. Captain Carter seemed to sense her hesitation. He gave a gentle nod. "I know this may sound strange, but I'd like to help. I'm not here to pity you, Princess. I'm here because I believe in you." Lyra felt a wave of emotions rising within her: hope, confusion, and something else she hadn't felt in years: belief. She had never been given a chance to prove herself, and now, for the first time, someone was offering her that chance. I don't know what to say," Lyra admitted softly. "You don't have to say anything just yet," Captain Carter replied. "But I'd like to be your friend, if you'll allow me. I think you have a lot more strength than even you realize." Lyra's heart stirred with something new, a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. For the first time, someone truly believed in her, not because of what she lacked, but because of who she was inside. As the conversation continued, Lyra found herself opening up in a way she hadn't done in years. The walls she had built around herself slowly began to crumble, piece by piece, with each kind word and understanding gesture from the human captain. For the first time, she felt like she mattered. The days following Captain Carter's visit were strange for Princess Lyra. She had never been treated with such kindness and respect, especially by someone from another world. She found herself thinking about him more than she expected, recalling the way he had spoken to her, not as a fragile princess, but as a person with potential, someone who mattered. Lyra had never been told that her mind, her spirit, could be her greatest strengths. It was a thought that both comforted and confused her. How could she have lived so many years without realizing that her true power wasn't in her eyes or her legs? Perhaps, she thought, this was the beginning of something new, something different from the life she had always known. Nox, her robotic assistant, noticed the change in her. As Lyra sat by the window one afternoon, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin, he spoke up. "Princess, you seem different," Nox observed, his mechanical voice soft but curious. "Is everything all right?" Lyra smiled slightly, a quiet laugh escaping her lips. I think I'm starting to believe that maybe everything is going to be all right." Nox beeped in surprise. "That is good news, Princess. It has been a long time since I've heard you say that." Lyra leaned back in her chair, her hands resting on her lap. She had a lot to think about. The arrival of the humans had shaken the very foundation of her world, and Captain Carter's words had planted a seed in her heart, a seed of hope. But hope was a fragile thing. She had learned long ago not to get too attached to dreams that could never come true. But for some reason, Lyra couldn't let go of the idea of change. Perhaps she had been living in the shadows for too long, accepting the beliefs of others about her. Maybe it was time to step into the light and show the world who she really was. That evening, the royal court held a banquet in honor of the human delegation. The palace was filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Lyra had been invited, of course, but she had always stayed away from such events in the past. They were filled with the same whispers, the same looks of pity and judgment. She had no interest in attending and facing the cold stares of those who saw her as a burden. But tonight was different. Lyra had a new sense of purpose, a new strength deep inside her that she had never known existed. She wanted to take the first step towards a new beginning, even if it meant facing the uncomfortable reality of her kingdom's beliefs. With Nox's help, Lyra made her way to the Grand Hall. The atmosphere was unlike anything she had ever experienced. The guests, both Vexorian and human, were talking, laughing, and enjoying the night. The human delegation was easily identifiable by their distinct attire and their relaxed, confident manner. Captain Carter stood near the center of the room, talking with King Zorith and several of the highest-ranking Vexorian officials. Lyra hesitated at the entrance, her heart racing. This was it, the moment she would have to face the court. She could already feel the gazes of the nobles on her, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and judgment. But this time, Lyra didn't feel afraid. For the first time in her life, She didn't care what they thought. She had something more important to focus on now, her own journey, her own strength. With a deep breath, Lyra stepped into the room. The whispers quieted almost immediately as all eyes turned towards her. She could feel the weight of their stares, but it no longer mattered. She was no longer the fragile, broken princess they had once seen. She was more than that. She was a person with value. Captain Carter spotted her as soon as she entered the hall. His eyes lit up with recognition, and a warm smile spread across his face. He excused himself from his conversation and walked towards her. "Princess Lyra," he said, bowing slightly. "It's an honor to see you here." Lyra felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had never received such a greeting before, especially not in front of the entire court. "Thank you, Captain Carter," she replied softly, her voice steady but full of emotion. "It's an honor to be here." For a moment, the room was silent, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The nobles exchanged confused glances, unsure of what to make of this new side of the princess. But Lyra didn't care. She was here, and she was standing tall in front of them. Captain Carter didn't miss a beat. "I'm glad you decided to join us," he said, his voice warm and reassuring. "I believe you'll find the evening to be more than just a banquet. It's a chance for everyone to see the true strength of Vexor." Lyra smiled faintly, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. "I believe so too," she said, looking around the room. She could see the confusion in the eyes of the court, but she also noticed something else: curiosity. They weren't pitying her anymore. They were beginning to see her for who she truly was. As the evening went on, Lyra found herself engaging in conversations with several of the human delegates. They asked her questions about her world, her people, and her thoughts on the future. For the first time, Lyra felt like she was truly being listened to, not because of her title or her appearance, but because of her ideas, her wisdom, and her unique perspective. The night was far from over, but Lyra knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind for Princess Lyra. The kingdom was buzzing with rumors about her appearance at the royal banquet, and even more so about her conversations with the human delegation. She was no longer just the blind, disabled princess locked away in the shadows. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope, hope that she could shape her own future, free from the limitations that had always been placed on her. But the royal court wasn't ready to accept this change so easily. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and the nobles still cast judgmental looks her way. They couldn't fathom that a princess with such challenges could stand tall and hold her own in a world of power and influence. Many of them still saw her as a liability, someone who would never be able to contribute meaningfully to the kingdom's future. However, Lyra was determined to prove them wrong. She could sense that the human visitors, especially Captain Carter, believed in her potential. Every conversation with him had sparked something inside her, a drive to show the world that she was more than her physical limitations. One afternoon, Lyra sat in the palace garden, enjoying the warm sunlight on her face. Nox, her robotic assistant, hovered nearby, his mechanical arms gently adjusting the plants that surrounded her. "You seem more at peace today, Princess," Nox said, his voice calm and thoughtful. Lyra smiled, feeling the truth of his words deep in her heart. "I am at peace, Nox. For the first time, I'm not afraid of what others think of me." Nox paused, processing her statement. "That is a significant change, Princess. Is this because of the humans, especially Captain Carter?" Lyra nodded, her fingers brushing the soft petals of a nearby flower. "Yes, I feel understood by them in a way that I never thought possible. Captain Carter sees beyond my blindness and disability. He sees me as a person, not a burden." Nox's sensors whirred softly in approval. "That is a remarkable thing. Humans have a unique ability to look past the surface and see the heart of a person." "I think he's right about one thing," Lyra said, her voice thoughtful. "I don't have to be defined by my disabilities. I can still contribute to my kingdom. I can still lead, even if it's in a different way. Her thoughts were interrupted when the palace doors opened, and a familiar figure appeared. Captain Carter stood in the doorway, smiling warmly as he spotted Lyra. He had become a regular visitor to the palace in recent weeks, always offering encouragement and support. "Princess Lyra," he greeted her with a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Lyra shook her head. "Not at all, Captain. It's always a pleasure to see you." "I've been thinking," Carter continued, stepping closer. "I know the royal court hasn't exactly been kind to you, but I also know that you have the potential to bring great change to Vexor. I've spoken with several of my people, and they agree. Your voice, your ideas, these could help us build a better future, not just for your people, but for all of us." Lyra's heart raced with a mix of excitement and doubt. "You really believe that?" "I do," he replied with certainty. "You have wisdom beyond your years. I can see it in the way you think, the way you speak. If you would allow it, I would be honored to help you share your ideas with the world." Lyra felt a rush of emotions. It had always been her greatest fear to step into the public eye, to speak before the court and the people of Vexor. But now, with Carter's support, she felt an unfamiliar sense of confidence. Could she really do this? Could she stand before her people and make them see her as more than just a fragile princess? "I don't know if I'm ready for such a big step," Lyra confessed, looking down at her hands. "I've spent my whole life hiding away from the world." Captain Carter knelt down in front of her, his gaze gentle and understanding. "You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to face it all by yourself. I'll be right here with you." Lyra looked up at him, her heart filled with gratitude. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. For the first time, she believed him. "Thank you, Captain. Your belief in me means more than you know." Over the next few days, Lyra worked closely with Captain Carter to prepare for her first public address. She was nervous, unsure of how the court would react. But she knew that this was her chance to prove that she was more than her circumstances, that she had the power to change the future of Vexor. The day of the address arrived, and the palace was alive with anticipation. The nobles had gathered in the grand hall, murmuring amongst themselves as they awaited the princess's arrival. Lyra sat in her chair, her hands trembling slightly. Nox stood by her side, offering quiet reassurance. As she made her way to the stage, Lyra felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. But then she remembered Captain Carter's words. She didn't have to do this alone. He was with her, and together, they could face anything. The moment Lyra took the stage, the room fell silent. Every eye in the court was on her, waiting for her to speak. She could feel their judgment, their doubt, but she refused to let it control her. She took a deep breath and began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I am not defined by my blindness," she said, her words ringing out clearly. "I am not defined by my disability. I am defined by my mind, my heart, and my will to create change. And I believe that together, we can build a future where no one is limited by their circumstances." As the words left her mouth, she felt a surge of power inside her. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for anyone who had ever been told they couldn't succeed, couldn't achieve greatness. Lyra's journey had only just begun, but in that moment, she knew she was on the path to something greater than she had ever imagined. The grand hall was silent as Princess Lyra stood at the podium. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had done her best to prepare for this moment. The grand nobles of Vexor, the court members, and even the visiting human delegation were all seated before her, waiting for her to speak. It was a moment that would determine much of her future. Lyra took a deep breath and glanced briefly to her side. Captain Carter stood there, offering her an encouraging nod. She smiled at him and turned her attention back to the crowd. The eyes of the court were on her, but this time, she didn't feel as afraid. They would either listen or they wouldn't, but she was going to speak her truth regardless. She began, her voice clear and steady. "People of Vexor," she started, her tone strong but calm. "For many years, I have been kept in the shadows of our kingdom. I've been told that my blindness, my disability, made me unfit for any responsibility. I've been kept in the dark, not only physically, but emotionally as well. My potential has been hidden from the world." The nobles shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lyra could sense their discomfort, but she didn't falter. She had no intention of allowing herself to be silenced any longer. "But I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a leader," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am not just the blind princess of Vexor. I am someone who has the potential to help shape the future of this kingdom." There was a murmur among the crowd. Some of the nobles exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to make of her bold words. Lyra could feel their skepticism, but she refused to back down. This was her moment. "I know that many of you believe that someone like me cannot lead," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. "That because I cannot see with my eyes, I am somehow incapable of seeing the truth of our world. But I disagree. My blindness has taught me to listen with my heart. It has taught me to sense the needs of others in ways that many of you cannot." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. The room was still, everyone listening intently. "I am not here to take power from those who have it. I am here to work with you. I am here to help guide our kingdom to a future where all of our people are seen, where no one is hidden because of their differences. I may be different, but that is exactly why I can offer something valuable." As she spoke, she could feel the tension in the room slowly begin to shift. The nobles, who had once whispered behind her back, were now listening. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they were not enough. Lyra could sense the presence of Captain Carter in the crowd, and his unwavering support filled her with strength. His belief in her, and in what she could achieve, was a foundation she could build on. Her speech continued, each word more confident than the last. "I want to build a kingdom where we value minds and hearts over appearances, where we lift each other up, not tear each other down. We have the power to create that future, and I am willing to work with all of you to make it a reality." There was a long silence after she finished speaking. For a moment, no one moved, no one made a sound. Lyra's heart raced, unsure of what to expect. Had she done enough? Would they accept her words? Then, slowly, a few of the nobles began to clap. It was soft at first, hesitant, but it grew louder as more joined in. The applause was tentative, but it was there. Lyra stood tall, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. She had done it. She had spoken her truth, and her people had heard her. But the most significant moment came when Captain Carter stepped forward, a proud smile on his face. He raised his hand in a gesture of respect and admiration. "That was a speech worthy of a leader," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "Princess Lyra has the vision, the heart, and the strength to lead us into a new era. I stand with her." His words echoed through the hall, and for the first time, Lyra felt truly seen. She had done what she thought was impossible. She had stepped into the light, and now she was no longer hidden. The future was uncertain, but it was full of possibilities. After the address, the court began to dissolve, but Lyra's thoughts were still racing. She had taken the first step toward a new future, but there were still many challenges ahead. Some nobles had been convinced by her words, but many others still doubted her abilities. Her journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only just beginning. As she walked back toward her chambers, Captain Carter caught up with her, his expression kind and warm. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with pride. Lyra smiled at him, the weight of the day slowly lifting off her shoulders. "I couldn't have done it without you, Captain. Your belief in me has made all the difference." "I'll always believe in you, Princess," he replied. "You've already shown that you have the heart of a leader. Now it's just a matter of time before the rest of the kingdom sees it too." Lyra felt a surge of gratitude. With Carter by her side, she knew she was no longer alone in this journey. The road ahead might be difficult, but she was ready. Together, they would forge a new future for Vexor, one that saw value in all its people, regardless of their differences. And for the first time in her life, Lyra truly believed in herself. The days following Princess Lyra's speech were full of tension and anticipation. The court had not fully accepted her vision for the future, but there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Nobles who had once turned their backs on her now found themselves reluctantly respecting her determination. Even the highest-ranking members of the royal family, who had been dismissive of her, began to take notice. Yet, the real test was not in the applause or the nods of approval. It was in the actions that followed. Lyra spent countless hours in meetings, discussing ways to implement the changes she had spoken about. Many of the nobles agreed that something had to be done for the future of Vexor. However, there were still many who opposed her, who believed that her disability made her unfit to lead. But Lyra, determined to prove herself, pressed on. One afternoon, Lyra sat in a large conference room. A map of Vexor sprawled across the table in front of her. Several nobles, including her uncle, Lord Myron, had gathered to discuss the kingdom's resources and future expansion. Lyra listened carefully as the discussions unfolded, her sharp mind taking in every detail. She may not have been able to see the map, but she could feel the energy in the room, sense the tension between the factions. Lord Myron, a tall and imposing figure, spoke with authority as he pointed to areas of the map. "We must expand our territories if we are to remain competitive with the other kingdoms. There is no time to waste." Lyra raised a hand, her voice steady but firm. "Expansion may seem like the answer, but we must also consider the people we already have. Vexor's strength is not only in its territory, but in its people. If we continue to ignore the needs of our citizens, we risk weakening ourselves from within." A few of the nobles nodded, while others frowned. Myron sneered at her suggestion. "You have no experience in these matters, Princess. Your words are well-meaning, but they are naive. You don't understand the complexities of governance." Lyra's heart raced, but she held her ground. "Perhaps I don't understand everything, but I understand that Vexor's future depends on unity and care for all its people, not just power and expansion. If we don't address the needs of the lower classes, if we don't ensure equality for everyone, we will fall apart from the inside." The room grew quiet as her words lingered in the air. Captain Carter, who had been standing in the back, watching quietly, could see the shift in the room. Though there was still resistance, Lyra had made an impact. The nobles were listening. For the first time, they were considering her words seriously. Lord Myron's expression darkened, but he couldn't deny that there was some truth in what Lyra had said. "We shall see," he muttered, clearly displeased. "But I believe expansion is still the priority." As the meeting continued, Lyra remained calm and focused, presenting her ideas for improving education, healthcare, and infrastructure, ideas that would help Vexor's citizens thrive. It was a long battle, but she refused to give up. Each time a noble tried to challenge her, she answered with grace, showing that her disability did not mean she lacked wisdom or strength. When the meeting finally ended, Lyra felt a sense of accomplishment. Though not all of her ideas had been accepted, she had managed to shift the conversation in the right direction. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was beginning to see that her voice could be heard. She was not the helpless princess they had once thought her to be. She was a leader. As she left the conference room, Captain Carter was waiting for her in the hallway. His face was filled with pride. "You did well, Princess," he said softly, his voice filled with admiration. Lyra smiled, grateful for his support. "It wasn't easy, but I'm not going to give up. We have a long way to go, but I believe we can make a difference." "I know you can," Carter replied, "and I'll be with you every step of the way." Together, they walked down the hall, side by side. Though the challenges ahead were great, Lyra now felt more confident in her ability to face them. The road to change was not simple, but with Carter's support and her own determination, she believed she could lead Vexor into a better future. That night, As Lyra lay in her chambers, she thought about the journey ahead. She thought about the long hours, the resistance, and the doubts that still lingered in her mind. But as she closed her eyes, she felt a sense of peace. She knew that no matter what, she was doing the right thing. Her journey had only just begun, and though the path was uncertain, she knew that she would walk it with her head held high. She was not just a blind princess anymore. She was a leader of her people. And for the first time, she truly believed that the future of Vexor could be bright. The days that followed were filled with both success and challenges. Lyra had made her mark on the kingdom, and although the road ahead was still full of obstacles, there was a new sense of hope in Vexor. The nobles who had once dismissed her now found themselves considering her proposals with more seriousness. Slowly, they began to understand that Lyra's vision for Vexor was not just a dream. It was a future worth striving for. The royal court had become a battleground of ideas, but Lyra was no longer the quiet princess hidden behind palace walls. She was a force, a leader who fought for the betterment of her people. She had come a long way from the girl who had been rejected and overlooked. Now, her words carried weight, and her actions were starting to inspire real change. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Lyra stood at the palace balcony overlooking the city. The wind was soft, and the view was breathtaking. Vexor, though imperfect, was home. She thought about all the people she had met over the past few months, the ones who had shared their stories with her, the ones whose struggles she had come to understand. She thought of the children who now had access to better education, the families who had better health care, and the workers whose lives had improved because of the changes she had fought for. But there was still much to be done. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Captain Carter approaching, a gentle smile on his face. He had been with her every step of the way, supporting her when others doubted her. His loyalty meant more to her than words could express. "You've done it, Princess," Carter said, his voice full of pride. "Vexor is starting to change because of you." Lyra smiled but shook her head. "It's not just me. There are so many others who have helped make this possible. The people of Vexor, they're the real heroes. I just gave them a voice." Carter stepped closer, his eyes warm with admiration. "You gave them the strength to believe in themselves. You showed them that their voices matter." Lyra's heart swelled at his words. She had fought for so long to be heard, to prove that she was more than her disability. And now she was beginning to see the results of her hard work. But she knew this was only the beginning. "You know, there was a time when I thought I could never be the ruler this kingdom needed," Lyra admitted quietly. "I was too afraid, too unsure of myself." Carter placed a hand on her shoulder, offering his comfort. "We all have our doubts, but you've come a long way, Princess. The kingdom needs you, and I'm proud to stand beside you." Lyra looked up at the stars now twinkling in the sky. She felt a sense of peace settle over her. The future of Vexor was still uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she was confident that it would be bright. She had faced rejection, but now she had earned the respect of her people. The road ahead would not always be easy, but Lyra was no longer afraid of the challenges. She was ready to face them head-on. "I won't stop," she said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "I'll keep fighting for Vexor, for the people. I won't let anyone, no matter their power, take away what we've worked for." Carter smiled, his pride in her evident. "I know you won't, Princess. You've shown all of us what true leadership looks like." The two of them stood in silence for a moment, watching the city below. The lights of Vexor shone brightly in the distance, a symbol of the hope that had begun to spread throughout the kingdom. There was still much work to be done, but with Lyra at the helm, the future seemed more promising than ever. As the night grew darker, Lyra turned to face the challenges of tomorrow, but she was no longer the uncertain princess she had once been. She was a leader, a beacon of strength and hope for Vexor, and with Carter by her side, there was nothing she couldn't achieve.